The hunters arrive. The forest outside Jack's cabin glowed red like the sky was on fire. The strange humming turned into a deep growl that shook the windows. Jack gripped his rifle tight, standing beside the curtain, trying to see what was coming. The two alien twins huddled under a blanket by the fire. Their large silver-blue eyes followed every sound. The smaller one clung to Jack's old flannel sleeve, as if he was the only thing between them and death. "Stay down," Jack whispered, his voice steady but low. "Don't move, no matter what happens." Through the frosted window, he saw shadows moving between the trees. Then came a flash, bright and sharp. A red beam hit the ground near his truck outside, melting snow and leaving a smoking hole. Jack's instincts screamed at him to hide, but his protective side was stronger. He stepped back from the window and loaded his rifle. The twins made soft clicking sounds. Jack turned to see one of them lift its small hand, glowing faintly blue. It was trying to speak again, but this time Jack heard it clearly inside his head. "They find us. Bad ones. Take. Hurt." Jack didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. Whoever was out there wasn't just looking. They were hunting. "Not tonight," Jack muttered. He blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, except for the faint light from the fire. Then he moved quietly to the back door. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped outside. The cold bit his skin, but he ignored it. The forest was alive with red light now, moving slowly through the trees like ghostly fireflies. He crouched behind a fallen log and watched. 3 tall figures appeared, wrapped in black armor that shimmered with red lines. Their faces were hidden behind helmets shaped like skulls. Each carried a glowing weapon humming with strange energy. They moved in perfect formation, scanning the ground. Jack's heart pounded. He had no idea who they were, but they weren't human. One of the armored figures raised a scanner. A sharp tone filled the air. "Targets located," a metallic voice said. "Inside structure. 2 life forms, and 1 unknown." Jack cursed under his breath. He aimed his rifle, lined up the shot, and fired. The bullet struck the nearest figure square in the chest. It staggered back, sparks flying, but didn't fall. The others turned instantly, firing beams of red energy in his direction. Jack dove behind the log as the snow exploded around him. He rolled, came up on one knee, and fired again. 2 quick shots. This time, one of the figures fell, smoke rising from its chest plate. Jack didn't wait. He ran back toward the cabin, snow flying with every step. Inside, the twins were crying softly, their blue glow brighter now. "Go," one of them said inside his head. "Hide!" but Jack shook his head. "Not without you." He grabbed a heavy blanket, wrapped it around both of them, and carried them in his arms like fragile children. Then he kicked open the back door and ran toward the trees. Behind him, the cabin exploded in a burst of red fire as the hunters fired again. Flames lit the night. The shockwave threw Jack forward, but he held on to the twins. His ears rang, and his breath came fast and cold. He stumbled down the slope toward the frozen river. The hunters followed, their red lights cutting through the smoke like angry eyes. Jack reached the riverbank and hid behind a large boulder. The twins pressed close against his chest. One looked up at him, eyes full of tears that glowed faintly blue. "Why are they after you?" Jack whispered. The answer came softly in his mind. "We escape." "From prison ship." "We not soldiers." "We only children." Jack's stomach tightened. "Prison ship." That explained the hunters. They were probably guards, or worse. He peeked over the rock and saw one of the armored figures scanning the river. They were closing in. He needed a plan. Then he saw it. A fallen tree stretched across the frozen water like a bridge. It wasn't far. If he could make it there quietly, they might lose their trail in the thick woods beyond. He waited until the hunters turned their lights away. Then he moved, crouching low, his boots silent in the snow. The ice groaned under his weight, but he kept going. Halfway across, a sound made him freeze. A sharp cracking noise. He looked down. The ice beneath him was splitting. "Hold on," he whispered to the twins, and ran the last few steps. The ice shattered behind him, plunging chunks of frozen water into the river. The sound drew the hunter's attention. "Target detected," the metallic voice roared. Red beams sliced through the air, hitting the trees beside him. Jack ducked and kept running, using the smoke and darkness as cover. Finally, he reached the far side and dove behind a thick pine tree, gasping for breath. The forest on this side was steeper and darker, full of cliffs and frozen creeks. The hunters reached the riverbank but stopped. Their scanners flickered. "The broken ice confused them. Signal lost," one said. "Reacquire trail." They turned and began spreading out in the wrong direction. Jack waited, not daring to breathe. When the red lights faded, he slowly stood up. The twins were shaking, but alive. Jack smiled faintly and whispered, "Told you I'd keep you safe." One of them reached up and touched his face gently. "You good human." Jack chuckled softly. "Guess I try to be." He looked back at the smoke rising from where his cabin once stood. His home was gone, but he didn't regret it. He had no idea what he'd just stepped into, but he knew he couldn't stop now. Those kids needed him, and if whoever was out there wanted a fight, they'd find out what a human lumberjack could really do. The twins rested their heads against his chest as he started walking deeper into the wilderness, away from the burning light and into the shadows of the mountains. Somewhere far above, unseen, another ship watched silently from orbit. Its lights blinked once and vanished into the stars. The night in the forest. The forest was quiet, too quiet for this time of year. Usually the sound of owls, crickets, and the rustle of small creatures filled the night. But on this cold evening, everything seemed to hold its breath. Miles deep inside the Canadian wilderness, Jack Turner, a tall and broad lumberjack, worked alone under the pale moonlight. He had been cutting trees for nearly 20 years, a man of few words but strong hands and a quiet heart. The wind whistled through the pines, and Jack paused, wiping sweat from his brow. Then he heard it, a strange humming sound, not like any machine he'd ever known. It came from above, deep and pulsing, as if the sky itself had started to vibrate. Jack looked up, expecting maybe a plane, but what he saw froze him where he stood. A silver light cut through the darkness, slicing across the forest canopy. The trees shimmered in its glow, casting long shadows on the snow. Then, with a thunderous crack, something crashed beyond the ridge. The ground trembled beneath Jack's boots. Birds erupted from the trees, screaming into the night. Jack's instincts told him to stay away, but curiosity won. He grabbed his axe and flashlight, then started walking toward the smoke rising in the distance. The smell of burned metal filled the air. When he reached the clearing, Jack stopped dead in his tracks. There, half buried in the earth, was a small, glowing craft, like a silver teardrop split open. Sparks jumped from its sides, and faint blue smoke curled into the air. He approached carefully. The craft was no helicopter, no drone, and certainly no aircraft he'd ever seen. It looked alive, almost organic, pulsing faintly like a living thing. Then he heard it, a tiny cry, high-pitched and weak, coming from inside the wreckage. Jack crouched and peered through a crack in the metal. Inside, two small shapes huddled together, trembling. They were no bigger than rabbits, with smooth blue skin that shimmered faintly in the light. Their large eyes glowed softly, full of fear and pain. For a long moment, Jack could only stare. His heart pounded in disbelief. Were these children? No, not human children, aliens. One of them lifted its small hand and made a faint chirping sound like a bird. Jack's instincts, those of a protector, not a fighter, took over. "It's okay," he whispered softly, his voice calm and deep. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The little beings flinched but didn't run. Jack gently reached through the broken edge of the craft and lifted one out. It was lighter than he expected, and its body gave off a faint warmth. The second followed, clinging to his arm. They looked up at him with wide eyes, and for a second, he thought he saw gratitude. Then the sound returned. The same deep hum, but now louder, angrier. Jack looked up. Through the clouds, another light appeared. This one was darker, red instead of silver. It wasn't friendly. The two tiny aliens began to chirp in panic. Jack felt their small hands gripping his sleeve, trembling. He didn't know what was going on, but one thing was clear. Something dangerous was coming for them. "All right," he muttered, pulling his jacket around them. You're coming with me." He ran back through the trees, his boots pounding against the frozen ground. Behind him, the forest lit up with flashes of red light. The second ship descended fast, burning through the clouds like fire. Jack didn't stop until he reached his cabin, a sturdy wooden house built by his own hands. He kicked the door open, ran inside, and shut it tight. He placed the two small creatures on a blanket near the fire. They looked exhausted, whispering soft, musical sounds to each other. One had a small injury, a burn along its arm. Jack tore a strip from his old flannel shirt and gently wrapped the wound. He had seen many things in his life, storms, bears, even forest fires, but nothing like this. Outside, the humming sound grew closer again. Red light flashed between the trees. Whoever, or whatever, was hunting these two was getting near. Jack reached for his rifle, checking the chamber. He wasn't a soldier, but he wasn't about to let anyone or anything harm those small creatures under his roof. One of the twins, the smaller one, looked up and touched his hand. For a brief moment, Jack felt something strange in his mind. A faint voice, not heard but felt. "Help, please." Jack's heart stopped. The voice wasn't in his ears, it was in his head. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I got you, kid. You're safe here." Outside, the red glow intensified. Branches cracked, and the air began to buzz like electricity. Jack stood by the window, weapon ready, watching the forest come alive with light and shadow. He didn't know who these little beings were or why they had come. But he knew one thing for sure. No one messed with someone under Jack Turner's protection. The night wasn't over yet, and out there in the dark, something was coming for them. Something was coming for them. Secrets in the snow, the morning came slowly. Pale sunlight touched the forest, melting frost from the trees. Smoke still rose from the direction of Jack's cabin, now nothing but ashes in the distance. Jack sat beside a small fire he had built in a hidden cave. The two alien twins lay wrapped in his thick coat, their faint blue glow lighting up the rocky walls. They had not spoken much since the night before. He handed them both a tin cup of warm water. "Drink slow," he said softly. "You've been through hell." The smaller twin nodded and took a careful sip. The other one stared at the flames, its big silver eyes reflecting the firelight. Jack studied them quietly. They looked young, maybe no older than 10 if they were human. Their skin shimmered like moonlight, and their small hands had only 3 fingers each. He still couldn't believe what had happened. A day ago, he'd been chopping wood. Now, he was sitting in a cave with 2 alien kids who had fallen from the sky. Finally, he spoke. "You said last night you were on a prison ship. Who were the people chasing you?" The larger twin looked up slowly. Its voice echoed faintly in his mind. "Hunters. From Krail Dominion. They take anyone they capture to work. No freedom, no mercy," Jack frowned. "And you escaped from them?" The smaller one nodded. "Yes, we hide in cargo pod. Crash here. You find us." Jack leaned back, rubbing his chin. "So they'll keep coming. They won't stop until they find you." Neither twin answered, but their eyes said enough. He sighed and poked the fire with a stick. "Then we'll have to make sure they don't." For a while, the only sound was the fire crackling. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks. Jack stood and walked to the cave entrance, peering out at the forest below. The hunters were somewhere out there, scanning, searching. He could almost feel their machines humming through the air. He turned back. "We need to move before nightfall. I know a place about 10 miles north, an old ranger station. Strong walls, radio tower. We can hole up there." The twins exchanged a glance, and the smaller one whispered, "You help us." "Why?" Jack paused for a moment before answering. "Because you're kids." "Because someone's got to." The larger twin tilted its head. "Humans kind?" Jack gave a small smile. "Some are. Some ain't. I'm trying to be one of the better ones." They didn't understand the words fully, but they smiled anyway. Jack packed his small bag, filled it with food, ammo, and a few tools. He helped the twins wrap themselves in blankets and lifted them gently. They were light as feathers. The hike through the forest was slow but steady. Jack followed old logging trails he knew by heart. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots, and every few minutes he stopped to listen for the hum of engines. Once, far in the distance, he heard a faint metallic sound, The hunters were still out there. By noon, clouds had darkened again. A storm was coming. Jack picked up the pace. The twins clung to his shoulders, whispering softly to each other in their strange musical language. When they finally reached the ridge, Jack spotted the ranger station, a small wooden outpost on a rocky rise. The old radio tower stood tall but crooked, covered in ice. It hadn't been used in years, but it would do. They hurried inside. The building creaked, but the roof held. Jack set the twins near the old stove and started another fire. While it warmed up, he walked over to the dusty radio equipment. The wires were a mess, and the generator was half buried under tools. But Jack had worked enough logging camps to know how to fix old machines. He spent the next hour cleaning connections, checking fuel, and tightening bolts. Finally, with a cough and a roar, the generator came to life. Lights flickered on. The twins jumped in surprise, then smiled. Their soft voices filled his mind again. "Magic machine!" Jack chuckled. "Close enough." He tuned the radio, listening to static. No clear signal, but maybe, just maybe, someone would hear if he sent out a distress call. He hesitated. Who would believe him if he said he'd found aliens in the woods? Instead, he sent out a coded emergency. 2 injured miners. Non-human. Hostile pursuers. Request backup. Then he turned off the mic. He turned to find the smaller twin watching him closely. "Someone coming?" it asked in a whisper. Jack nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I don't know who yet." That night, the storm hit hard. Snow hammered the roof. Wind howled through cracks in the walls. The fire flickered low, and Jack sat near the door, rifle across his lap. The twins slept beside the stove, curled together like kittens. Their soft glow reflected off the walls, casting strange shadows that danced with the light. Jack's eyes grew heavy. He thought of his cabin, the only home he'd ever known, burned to ashes. He thought of the hunter's armor, their cold voices, and the way the twins had looked at him when they said, "No mercy." Something told him this was only the beginning. Then, just as he started to drift off, a sharp sound echoed outside, the crunch of snow under heavy boots. Jack's eyes snapped open. He grabbed his rifle and crawled to the window. In the storm's white haze, he saw shapes, 3 of them, moving slowly toward the station. Red lights glowed faintly from their chests. The hunters had found them again. Jack took a deep breath, heart pounding, and whispered, "Round 2, you bastards." He turned to the twins. "Stay down. No matter what happens, don't come out." The door began to shake, and in the howling wind, the hunters' cold, mechanical voices called out, "Return the fugitives, human, or be terminated. Fugitives, human, or be terminated." The fight at the ranger station. The wind howled like a beast outside. Snow whipped against the old ranger station, rattling the windows. Inside, Jack crouched beside the stove, rifle in his hands, listening to the heavy steps approaching the door. The twins hid under a pile of blankets in the corner, their faint blue light trembling like candle flames. "Stay quiet," Jack whispered. "Don't move," a deep metallic voice echoed from outside. "Human, surrender the fugitives." "Resistance will result in your elimination." Jack didn't answer. He cocked his rifle and aimed it toward the door. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the door exploded inward. Wood splinters flew across the room. 3 armored hunters stepped through the smoke, their red visors glowing in the dark. Their weapons buzzed with deadly energy. Jack fired first. The rifle kicked hard against his shoulder. The bullet hit one of the hunters right in the chest, knocking it back. Sparks flew and the creature fell against the wall. The other 2 fired back. Red beams scorched the stove, sending firewood flying. Jack dove behind a table, the heat from the energy blasts burning the air. He fired again, once, twice, hitting another hunter's shoulder. The thing roared, its armor hissing with steam. Jack wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a soldier. But years of working alone in the wild had made him fast and clever. He knew how to survive. He rolled across the floor, grabbed a metal oil can, and threw it toward the stove. Then he grabbed a burning log and swung it like a bat. The can burst into flames, filling the room with smoke and fire. The hunters' sensors flickered in the thick smoke. They fired wildly, hitting walls and furniture. Jack used the chaos to move behind them. He swung his axe hard, striking the back of one helmet. The blade didn't cut through, but the force cracked the visor. The hunter stumbled, blinded. Jack shoved it into the flames. The last one turned toward him, raising its weapon. Before it could shoot, a sudden burst of blue light filled the room. Jack froze. The smaller twin stood up from the blankets, its little hands glowing bright blue. A shockwave burst from its palms, slamming into the hunter like a wall of wind. The creature flew backward, crashing through the door into the snow. Jack blinked in disbelief. What the hell? The twins were both standing now, their eyes glowing. The larger one looked at Jack and said softly inside his head, "We help." Together. Jack grinned. "All right then. Let's finish this." He ran outside, rifle ready. The last hunter tried to rise from the snow, sparks jumping from its armor. Jack aimed and fired one last time. The shot hit clean through the chest. The red light in its visor flickered and went out. Silence returned. Only the wind and the crackle of fire filled the air. Jack stood breathing hard, his breath turning to fog in the freezing air. His coat was scorched, his hands shaking, but he was alive. He turned to the twins who stood in the doorway, the glow fading from their hands. They looked tired, pale, but unhurt. "Guess you two ain't as helpless as you look," Jack said with a small smile. The smaller twin tilted its head. "We protect family," Jack chuckled. "Family, huh? I'll take that." He walked back inside, kicking aside the broken door. The room was a mess. Tables overturned, walls scorched, but the station was still standing. He poured some melted snow into a pot and set it by the fire. The twins sat close together, whispering softly in their musical language. Jack watched them, wondering how much power they really had and how many more hunters might come. After a while, the radio crackled. Jack turned sharply toward it. A faint voice came through the static. "This is Search Unit 47. Receiving distress signal." "Identify yourself." Jack grabbed the mic. "This is Jack Turner, civilian. I've got 2 non-human miners in danger. Hostile forces on Earth soil. Request immediate extraction or backup." Static buzzed, then the voice returned. "Copy that, Jack Turner. Hold your position. Extraction team en route. ETA. 40 minutes, Jack exhaled in relief. 40 minutes, he muttered. "We can handle that," but one of the twins suddenly tensed. "No, danger not over," Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" The larger twin looked toward the window, eyes wide with fear. "Leader comes," Jack followed their gaze. Out in the storm, a dark shape descended from the clouds. It was huge, 10 times the size of the small ships he'd seen before. The air vibrated with a deep hum that made his bones ache. A crimson glow spread across the snow as the massive craft landed in the clearing below. The twins clutched each other tightly. "The warden," one whispered. "He finds us." Jack felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was no small patrol. This was the one in charge, their commander. The ship's ramp opened, and a giant figure stepped out. It was twice as tall as any human, covered in black armor lined with pulsing red veins of light. Its helmet had curved horns like some kind of alien demon. It spoke in a voice that made the air tremble. "Surrender the fugitives, human. You have 30 seconds. Jack raised his rifle again, his jaw tight. "You picked the wrong planet, pal." The warden's glowing eyes turned toward him. "Primitive creature," it said coldly. "You stand in the path of the Dominion. You will be crushed." Jack cocked the rifle. "You're welcome to try." He looked back at the twins. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't give up." Snow blew across the clearing, glowing red in the ship's light. The battle wasn't over. It was only about to begin. It was only about to begin. The warden's challenge snow whirled across the clearing as the giant alien warden stepped out of his ship. The ground shook under his heavy boots. His armor gleamed black and red like molten steel, and every movement hummed with power. Jack stood at the ranger station doorway, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the towering creature. The twins crouched behind him, trembling but ready. The warden's deep voice rolled like thunder. "Humans, surrender the fugitives." "You cannot fight the Dominion." Jack's breath came in cold puffs. "You're on my land," he said quietly. "That means you play by my rules." The warden tilted his head, almost amused. "You are primitive, weak. Why risk your life for them?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Because they're kids. And because someone has to stand up to bullies. The warden's glowing red eyes narrowed. Then you die with them. Before Jack could blink, the alien raised one arm and fired a red beam. The blast tore through the wall beside him, sending wood and fire flying. Jack dove aside, rolled, and fired 3 shots in return. The bullets sparked off the warden's armor harmlessly. Figures, Jack muttered. Not that easy. He sprinted out the back door, snow crunching under his boots. The warden followed, each step like thunder. Energy beams scorched the ground where Jack had just been. Jack ran for the tree line, weaving between frozen trunks. The forest was his home, his ground, and he knew every inch of it. He had no plan yet, just one thought: keep them safe. Back at the cabin ruins, the twins watched from the window. The larger one whispered, "He cannot fight that." The smaller one shook its head. "We help." Their eyes began to glow faintly again. Meanwhile, Jack dove behind a fallen log and took a moment to breathe. He reloaded his rifle, though he knew it wouldn't do much. The warden's armor was like a tank, but Jack wasn't just a fighter. He was a thinker. His eyes landed on a set of old fuel barrels half buried in the snow, left from the ranger station's old logging days. A spark of an idea hit him. He waited until the warden's heavy steps drew closer. The red glow cut through the fog like a beacon. Jack shouted, "Hey, tin can! Over here!" The warden turned sharply toward the sound. "You cannot hide, human." Jack aimed, not at the warden, but at the barrels. One precise shot, boom. The explosion rocked the forest. Fire and smoke shot into the air, throwing snow everywhere. The warden staggered back, flames licking across his armor. Jack ducked behind a rock as debris rained down. When the smoke cleared, the warden was still standing, but his armor flickered, parts of it glowing weaker now. "You will pay for that," the alien growled. "Yeah, I hear that a lot," Jack said, breathing hard. He ran again, leading the warden toward the frozen river. He had one more idea. When he reached the icy bank, he stopped and turned. "Come on, then," he shouted. "Let's see what you're made of." The warden charged forward, the ground cracking under each step. Jack fired one more shot into the ice beneath them. The ice split and groaned. The warden stepped forward, and the surface gave way. With a thunderous crack, the alien fell through the frozen river, crashing into the freezing black water below. Jack dove aside as ice chunks flew everywhere. He crawled to the edge and looked down. The warden thrashed beneath the surface, trying to rise, but the weight of his armor pulled him deeper. Steam rose from the water as his red glow faded into the darkness. Then, silence. Jack fell onto his back, gasping. The cold air burned his lungs. He had no idea if the warden was dead, but he knew this fight had bought them time. He pushed himself up and looked back toward the station. The twins were running toward him, small figures glowing softly against the snow. "You did it!" The smaller one cried in his mind, voice full of joy. Jack managed a tired grin. "Yeah, maybe." But as they reached him, the ground trembled again. The river began to boil. Red light glowed beneath the ice. Jack's smile vanished. "Oh, hell." The warden erupted from the water, roaring, steam and flames bursting from his armor. He was damaged but alive, angrier than ever. He raised one massive hand, energy building in his palm. Jack grabbed the twins and dived behind a boulder just as a beam of red light blasted past, melting snow and stone. The warden stepped closer, his voice booming. "Enough games, human. You cannot win." Jack's mind raced. His gun was empty. The warden was unstoppable. Then he heard the sound of engines above, the same hum he'd heard before, but different this time. He looked up. Through the storm clouds, a silver ship appeared, glowing with soft blue light. It was sleek and clean, not like the Dominion ships. The twins' eyes widened. "Our people," they cried. The warden looked up too and roared in anger. "No, they will not take my prisoners!" The silver ship fired a blue beam that struck the ground between them. The light spread across the snow like a ripple. The warden stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. Jack felt a strong pull, like wind swirling around him. The twins glowed brighter, reaching out their small hands toward the light. Jack shouted over the roar of wind, "What's happening?" The larger twin looked at him, tears glowing in its eyes. "Home. We go home." The light grew brighter and brighter until Jack couldn't see. The twins' voices echoed faintly in his mind one last time. Thank you, Jack Turner. Brave human. We never forget. And then silence. The light vanished. The clearing was empty. The warden was gone. The ship had disappeared into the sky. Only the snow remained, falling softly around Jack as he knelt alone beside the frozen river. He looked up at the quiet stars and whispered, "Safe travels, little ones." Then he stood, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and walked slowly back toward the ruins of the ranger station, his boots crunching in the snow. The night was over, but Jack knew something deep in his gut. The stars would remember what one human lumberjack did that night. One human lumberjack did that night. The aftermath. The storm ended by dawn. The forest lay silent again, blanketed in fresh snow. Smoke still drifted from the ranger station ruins, curling into the pale morning sky. Jack Turner sat by the frozen river, his hands resting on his knees. The cold no longer bothered him. His eyes were fixed on the place where the silver light had vanished. The twins were gone. The warden was gone. And the forest was quiet again, almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Jack let out a long sigh. "Guess that's it," he muttered softly. He stood up, brushed the snow off his coat, and began walking back toward what was left of the station. Every step echoed with the memories of the night, the explosions, the screams, the glow of blue and red lights. It all felt like a dream now, but the burned trees and cracked ice said otherwise. When he reached the clearing, the sound of engines broke the silence. Jack looked up. From the east, a group of black helicopters appeared over the trees. They circled the area like vultures, kicking up snow with their rotors. Jack raised his hand to block the wind as one of them landed nearby. A group of men in military uniforms jumped out, wearing heavy gear and helmets. They carried scanners and rifles, human ones this time. "Put down your weapon," one of them shouted. Jack raised his hand slowly. "Easy, fellas. I'm not looking for trouble." A tall officer stepped forward, his face calm but serious. "Jack Turner?" "Yeah," Jack said. "That'd be me," the officer nodded. "We received your distress signal. You reported non-human life forms and hostile activity?" Jack hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. If he told them everything, would they even believe him? "Yeah," he finally said. "2 kids. Not from here. Ship crashed. I helped them. Then others came for them." The officer studied him for a long moment. "And where are they now?" Jack looked up at the sky. "Gone! Their people took them home." The officer gave a skeptical look but didn't argue. He turned to his men. "Sweep the area, full scan. Watch for radiation or energy traces." Jack watched them work. They set up equipment, scanned the ground, and collected pieces of melted metal from the snow. One soldier held up a chunk of black armor still faintly warm. "Sir," the soldier called, "this isn't like anything we've seen before." The officer frowned. "Bag it and send it to the lab." He turned back to Jack. "You said others attacked you. Describe them." Jack thought about the warden, his glowing red armor, his voice that shook the air. Big, strong, metal suits. They weren't human either. The officer nodded slowly, writing something in a small notebook. "You realize, Mr. Turner, this could be classified information." Jack smirked faintly. "Yeah, I figured." For a while, no one spoke. The soldiers worked quietly, gathering evidence, taking photos, marking spots in the snow. One of them approached the officer with a handheld scanner. "Sir, we're picking up strange energy signatures. Not radioactive, but something else." The officer looked at the readout. "Keep recording. Headquarters will want this." He turned back to Jack. "Whatever happened here, it's big. You're lucky to be alive." Jack chuckled dryly. "Yeah, guess I am." The officer looked him over. "You said they were children. What were they like?" Jack's expression softened. "Scared, lost, but brave. They didn't want to fight anyone. Just wanted to go home." The officer nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "If what you're saying is true, you might have saved their lives." Jack shrugged. "Just did what anyone decent would do." The officer smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how few people would have done that." A radio crackled in the background. "Sir, the debris is unusual, metals unknown type. We also found this." The soldier held up a small blue crystal-like shard. It glowed faintly, pulsing with soft light, the twins' light. Jack felt a pang in his chest as he stared at it. The smaller one had carried something like that around its neck. Maybe it fell during the fight. The officer looked at the shard and then at Jack. "You recognize this?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it belonged to one of the kids." The officer turned the shard in his hand, watching the light flicker. "Strange. It reacts to heat almost like it's alive," Jack said quietly. "Treat it with care. It's not a weapon. It's part of who they were." The officer gave a respectful nod. "Understood." When the soldiers finished collecting everything, the officer approached Jack again. "We'll be taking all of this for analysis. If anyone contacts you, you'll be briefed further. Until then, this entire area is under investigation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm going to tell the world aliens dropped by my cabin? Relax. I'm not that kind of fool." The officer smiled slightly. "Good to hear. You're free to go, Mr. Turner, and thank you for what you did." Jack nodded. "Just keep their secrets safe." As the helicopters lifted off, blowing snow in all directions, Jack watched them disappear into the sky. The forest slowly fell quiet again. He walked back to the burned-out remains of the station, where the blue crystal had once glowed. He knelt down, touched the snow, and whispered, "Hope you made it home, kids." A cold wind blew through the trees. For a moment, Jack thought he heard a faint musical sound, like the twins' soft voices carried on the breeze. He looked up at the sky and smiled. "Yeah, I hear you." Then he turned toward the horizon, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. The forest was scarred, but it was still standing, just like him. And somewhere out there, across the endless stars, two small aliens would remember the human lumberjack who saved them. The human lumberjack who saved them. A message from the stars 2 months had passed since the night the forest burned. Winter had started to fade, and spring sunlight now filtered through the trees, melting the last bits of snow. The air was calm again, but the woods were still scarred. Blackened trunks, patches of scorched earth, and the faint smell of smoke whenever the wind blew. Jack Turner had rebuilt part of his cabin. The walls still smelled like fresh pine, and his tools hung neatly in a row. Life had returned to something close to normal. He chopped wood, fixed fences, and hiked the trails. But he never forgot them. The twins. Sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could still see their glowing eyes and soft smiles. He could still hear their little voices, whispering his name in their strange, musical language. He didn't tell anyone what happened. Not the newspapers, not the radio, not even the rangers who came to check on him. He told them it was a gas explosion, nothing more. Let them believe that. The truth wasn't for everyone. One morning, he was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll through the trees. The forest had grown quiet again, too quiet even for spring. Then he heard it, a faint hum in the distance. Not a helicopter. Not a plane, something softer, familiar. Jack stood up and looked toward the sky. Through the morning clouds, a light appeared, small at first, then brighter. It hovered above the treetops, shimmering like a floating diamond. Jack's heart began to race. He set down his coffee and walked into the clearing. The light grew larger, pulsing gently. Then it split into 2 orbs, one blue, one green. They floated down slowly until they hovered just above the ground. Jack stopped a few feet away, unsure what to do. Then he heard it, a voice, faint but clear. Jack. It wasn't in English, but he understood it anyway. The sound carried meaning straight into his mind. The blue light flickered, and for a brief second, he saw their faces. The twins, smiling, alive. He took a step closer. "You made it," he whispered. "You really made it." The lights pulsed again, brighter this time, like they were happy to see him. Then another sound came, a series of melodic tones, soft and slow, like a song. The lights began to circle around him, leaving faint trails of color in the air. Jack felt warmth spread through his chest. His old scars stopped aching. The cold he always carried seemed to lift, replaced by a calm peace. He realized they weren't just visiting. They were saying goodbye. He raised his hand, smiling sadly. "Take care, you two. Don't forget us little humans down here." The light slowed, hovering for one last moment. Then a single small crystal, glowing faint blue, floated down and landed softly in Jack's palm. It was warm. He looked at it closely. Inside the crystal, faint patterns moved, like tiny stars swirling in water. A gift. A memory. A promise. The lights slowly rose higher, merging together into one brilliant glow. Then, with a soft flash, they shot upward into the clouds and vanished. Jack stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sky. The forest was silent again, but this time, it didn't feel lonely. He closed his fist around the crystal and whispered, "Goodbye, little ones." He returned to his cabin, placed the crystal on the wooden shelf above his workbench, and smiled. Whenever the sun hit it just right, the light scattered across the walls, little blue and green sparks that danced like laughter. From that day on, Jack kept the crystal close. He never told anyone about it, but he always felt a quiet presence nearby, especially on calm nights when the stars were bright. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees, it carried a faint hum that only he could hear, a soft, musical sound that reminded him that somewhere out there, across galaxies he'd never see, two young aliens remembered the human who saved them. They had thought humans were primitive, but that night in the forest, they learned something deeper, that courage, kindness, and sacrifice could shine brighter than any star, and that lesson would live with them and their people forever.